Chris Hipkins and a sausage roll tomorrow. Thank you, Sue.
Wait.
I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next. I'm back tomorrow at 3:45.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo, irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, incredibly popular is how the government's described its fog cannon subsidy scheme. So popular, it's kicking millions more into protecting retailers against ram raids and robberies. There is flash flooding at Waihi Beach, with some people evacuating. We'll have the latest. The COVID clawback, hundreds of businesses are being forced to pay back COVID funding. We talked to one owner about what went wrong. Could a missing Queenstown man and his stepson still be alive after escaping the country by boat? Pesky pitch invaders could jeopardise future NRL games, so is it time for whopper fines to stop them in their tracks? You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Talofa lava, I'm Evie Ashton. Up to 50 homes have been evacuated in the western bay of Plenty town of Waihi after severe thunderstorms sparked flash flooding. Numerous streets are waterlogged and State Highway 25 has closed north of the township after the heavy rain struck mid-afternoon. Those evacuated have been taken to the local RSA and include elderly residents. Waihi Beach Community Board Chair Rob Gowd says the area's stormwater infrastructure can't keep up.
This is the third, fourth or fifth storm we've had in the last 10 years where it's overwhelmed the stormwater system.
Waka Kotahi says State Highway 29 near Old Kaimai Road is closed in both directions due to a slip, and motorists are advised to travel via State Highway 2. It also says State Highway 25 north of Golden Valley Road has reopened after closing briefly due to flooding. The Police Association says more people will die on the roads as a result of new rules allowing officers to chase more fleeing drivers. In 2020, the police softened their approach after more than 70 people died in pursuits over the previous decade. But the Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa, says too many drivers are now refusing to stop and fewer are being caught. Association President Chris Cahill says he supports the change, but the new, more aggressive approach is likely to mean more deaths.
Currently, as it stands, police pretty much don't pursue anyone, so it stands to reason there will probably be an increase. We'd like to think that won't be the case, but unfortunately it will. But in saying that, we'd like to also think there's a significant decrease in the number of people fleeing from police in the first place.
A private investigator hired by the family of Mike Zhao Beckenridge, who has been missing since 2015, says his family believes his stepfather cared too much for the 11-year-old to kill him. The coroner is holding a hearing to determine if John Beckenridge and his stepson, Mike Zhao Beckenridge, are missing or dead since their disappearance in 2015. Today, the coroner heard from private investigator Mark Templeman, who said the family believes the pair had helped to leave the area and left the country on an ocean-going yacht or boat.
Mike's mother, Fiona Liu, now Russell, believes that when Mike is no longer under the influence of John Beckenridge, that he will reach out to her, and she further believes that John cared too much for Mike to hurt him.
Mark Templeman says John Beckenridge had previously changed his name and started a new life overseas, and they believe he's done it again. The government says extra funding for its fog cannon subsidy scheme will help an extra 3,000 retailers. The $4,000 subsidy available to small businesses was set up after the death of Auckland superette worker Janak Patel. Applications have skyrocketed since they opened in February, prompting the government to contribute another $11 million. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says this will make thousands more retailers safer.
Today's announcement means that if weekly approvals remain at the high levels that we're seeing at the moment, a further 3,350 fog cannons will be subsidised by the end of this year.
Nearly 600 fog cannons have been installed since February and more than 1,600 applications have been approved. Doctors at Palmerston North Hospital fear speaking out about concerns and often face barriers when trying to move patients between departments. These are among concerns raised in a report which RNZ has obtained about the culture and climate at the hospital. The report was commissioned after a heavily pregnant woman died of sepsis last year when her admission to the hospital's intensive care unit was delayed. Her child was stillborn. The report makes a series of recommendations, including better resourcing the intensive care unit. In sport, the Stars are hoping a neutral venue will help them in their quest for a maiden ANZ Premiership netball title. Runners-up twice previously, the Stars have yet to win the title and will play fellow Auckland side the Mystics in Hamilton on Sunday. The Stars beat defending champs the Pulse in yesterday's elimination final. The Mystics advanced straight to the title playoff after finishing top of the table at the end of the round-robin competition. Netball New Zealand booked the Hamilton venue before the season started, concerned over risks of not having a venue for the final. Stars captain Maya Wilson says she's unfazed at having to play the final outside of Auckland.
I do think we're going to see a lot of sea of blue and purple in those stands, and that's exciting. It will be a neutral venue, but it won't necessarily feel like a neutral venue, and I think that's probably the best case scenario for this final.
Former All Blacks coach Steve Hansen is urging rugby followers to give former Wallabies international Israel Folau a second chance. Folau was jeered by fans at Twickenham every time he touched the ball while playing for the World 15, coached by Hansen, against the Barbarians in London this morning. Folau was sacked by Rugby Australia 4 years ago for anti-gay social media posts. Hansen said after the match that while he doesn't agree with Folau's views, he should be given an opportunity to change. The Barbarians won 48-42. And the Black Sticks striker and three-time Olympian Nick Wilson has retired from international hockey after 181 games for New Zealand. That's the news.
Infrastructure discord.
Well, we always said we're open to sensible changes. Actually, it's the same thing that Labour said.
Sensible change is one thing. I mean, this effectively guts that part of the policy.
No, this is a sensible change.
International affairs.
It was a bit of a jibe at the West, saying basically don't underestimate the Turkish people or disrespect our democratic will.
And the Indy 500.
Spin, crash, oh, wow. See? You just don't know what's going on. Bonkers.
News at top speed. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula. Occasional showers. Some heavy and possibly thundery today, and again in Taranaki late tomorrow. Early morning fog patches. For Bay of Plenty and Taupo, rain heavy at times with possible thunderstorms, easing to showers today. Further showers tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered rain or showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Waded Upper. Periods of rain or showers, but long fine spells in Waded Upper tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Rain or showers with heavy and possibly thundery falls. Clearing from Marlborough and Nelson for a time tonight and tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Scattered rain, mainly in the west and south. Clearing today, but returning for a time tomorrow. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods today. Rain and possible thunderstorms tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Torrential rain has caused flash flooding in Waihi Beach and dozens of people have evacuated from their homes. Met Service says a thunderstorm delivered 45 millimetres of rain in just an hour after 2 p.m. Western Bay of Plenty District Council says 19 elder housing units have been flooded and evacuated, with most residents moving to the local RSA. Well, joining me now is the manager of the Waihi Beach RSA, Mel Geron. Mel, how many people have you got there and how are they faring?
Kia ora, Lisa. We've probably got about 20-odd people up here at the moment and they're doing really well. They're nice and dry now and having a good feed, so we're all over it.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's happened to their homes, and are these people who are in those units, pensioner units?
Yes, so basically just a torrential downpour. There was just a huge amount of water that came through, good flash flood there, and it's just had nowhere to go. So it's pretty much just filled up and flooded a few places. So, we've got them all out. Those that needed to be evacuated, it came up pretty quickly. but it's all pretty much subsiding now.
And will some of the homes be uninhabitable this evening?
Absolutely, yeah. Most of them. There'd be probably a good, I would say, off the top of my head, probably a good 15 homes at least.
So
uninhabitable tonight.
So Mel, what's going to happen? Where will the people spend the evening?
We've got them going to different places across Waihi Beach. We've got an amazing community here that are rallying around. So we've got some people going to private homes, some people going through to accommodations like campgrounds and things are in the area as well. So it's there's certain spots that have been affected quite heavily. There are some places that are still okay. So
RSA is known for its hospitality. You're putting on a warm meal for everybody?
Absolutely. Always got a carvery going on up here.
So what's on the menu tonight then for them?
So we've got a buffet going on tonight. We've got a full menu. There's steaks and salads and soups and everything. You name it, we can do it.
And generally, was it concentrated in one area? Is it subsiding? What's it looking like?
It's subsiding quite quickly now. It's been high tide, I think, was this afternoon, about 2 or 3, if I remember rightly. So high tide is subsiding and the waters are flowing out, but there's still quite a bit to drain. So,
yeah, I know you're busy, Mel, so we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Mel Gueron, who's the Waihi Beach RSA manager. They've got quite a few people there who are being rehomed this evening after their properties were flooded in what appears to be a flash downpour. 9 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A funding boost tonight for what the government describes as its highly popular fog cannon subsidy scheme. An extra $11 million is going into the program that picks up part of the cost of installing fog cannons in retail stores following an onslaught of ram raids and robberies, many by young offenders. 581 cannons have gone into businesses, but more than 1,600 applications have been approved for the $4,000 subsidy. Police Minister Ginny Anderson says she's pleased to be able to expand the scheme.
The scheme's been hugely popular and as we've seen more small businesses understand what's available to them, we've seen more take it up.
So another $11 million going into this. How much in total will the spend have been on fog cannons then?
There's the total amount in addition to the 11 million has been 6 previously.
Okay, so what is the waiting time for these fog cannon? I see 582 installations completed, yet you've got more than 1,600 applications approved.
We have a number of providers that have already been approved, and that's quite a straightforward process to go online to receive approval. And once the small business owner has that approval, they receive a voucher and they're then able to go and engage with one of those providers to install the fog cannon.
So what is the wait time to get an installation?
Well, that will depend on where you live and how many providers are in your area. I've had no reports of complaints about waiting. People tend to get them pretty quickly.
Then what is the disparity in the applications approved versus the number of installations? Only 582 installed, yet 1,664 applications approved.
That will depend on what providers are operating in that given area. So we will have more operators working in big places like Auckland, and if you're further out in places like Huntly, there may be 1 or 2, so they could wait a little bit longer to get one of those in place.
But you don't know how long wait times are?
The wait times, I've had no complaints that any small business owner who has been approved, they have had no complaints in terms of waiting too long. Once that $4,000 voucher has been approved, they are able to go out to market and engage with one of those providers to install.
Having to extend this program, that is an absolute disaster, isn't it?
I see it as a real way that this government is backing small business and backing retailers. It's absolutely unacceptable, this increase we've seen in retail crime, particularly ram raids. We know that this technology keeps our small business owners safe, and we're backing them to be able to be safe at work.
In your media release, you describe it as hugely popular and highly popular, incredibly popular, like it is something to be welcomed. The reason they need this is because they feel unsafe, isn't it?
What I hear from those small business owners that I meet with is once they have a fog cannon installed, they do feel safer. They're incredibly effective at deterring crime, and they're also very good at stopping theft occurring once they're activated.
But they're not popular because this is a choice, Minister. They're popular because people feel unsafe in their stores and they are being attacked.
The retail crime spike we're seeing is completely unacceptable. I fully acknowledge that. But business owners and their employees shouldn't have to feel fearful when they go to work. So this measure enables them to feel safer in their workplace.
Is it tone deaf to describe this as a highly popular fog cannon subsidy scheme?
Lisa, look, it's important that I get out that we are tackling this problem from both ends by making those small business owners safer in their workplace, but also looking at programs like Circuit Breaker, that those young people who are offending, apprehending those and making sure they have the full response of Oranga Tamariki and police and youth justice to stop that reoffending occurring.
Are you missing the point though, Minister? The reason you've got 1,662 applications and 582 fog cannons installed is because there's been a tsunami of ram raids. Retailers feel very unsafe. They feel their lives are being threatened and some of them are even shutting up shop. The extension of this scheme, is it not a failure?
I fully acknowledge that we have a problem and we are taking action to address this problem, and we're doing that in three main ways. The first way we're doing that is by having more police on the beat. This week we should reach 1,800 extra police officers. This is a measure, the fog cannon scheme, to make those small business owners feel safe in their workplace, but it's also important that we take the long-term gain by looking at those complex issues that are driving youth offending, family violence, mental health. We want to address those long-term challenges to make sure we're not back in the same place in 10 years' time.
If those measures were working, you wouldn't have such a long queue for fog cannons, would you?
I would argue that 10 years ago there was significant underinvestment in family violence and in supporting our young people, and we're seeing the detrimental effect now.
So what does success look like? Zero demand for fog cannons?
What success looks like is young people who are not reoffending, young people who are safe in their homes and not being exposed to high levels of family harm.
So you're not embarrassed at all by the fact that you have to extend this scheme?
I am not happy at all to see the level of crime happening in New Zealand. I hear firsthand from public, from small business owners, that they feel angry and they feel afraid. That is exactly why we are getting out there and providing additional support with $11 million of additional funding to enable those small business owners to feel safe in their workplace.
Police Minister Ginny Anderson there, so an extra $11 million going into that fund. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The coroner's hearing looking into whether a Queenstown man and his stepson are dead has today been told the boys' family believe the pair are alive and living overseas under assumed identities. John Beckenridge and his stepson, Mike Zhao Beckenridge, disappeared in March 2015 and their car was found crashed at the bottom of a steep cliff in the Catlins. A coroner's hearing is being held to work out if they are missing or dead. Today, the hearing heard the two opposing views of the police and the boys' family about their fate. Rachel Graham has been at the hearing.
The family of Mike Zhao Beckenridge hold on to the hope that he did not die in March 2015 when his stepfather's car plunged into the ocean, and they want the coroner to confirm that with his ruling. The family have hired private investigator Mark Templeman to look into the case, and today he told the coroner that they believe John Beckenridge took a number of steps to make it look like a murder-suicide, to put people off their track. This includes the text messages, which were the last known contact with John Beckenridge.
Essentially, these texts are suicide notes, and there are a number of them. It's very hard to believe that he hasn't texted or sent a suicide note to his very best friend in that group of people.
Mr. Templeman says the family also believe the clifftop site, which the car went off, was carefully chosen precisely because John Beckenridge knew it would be very difficult to check for bodies, and a car crashed into the ocean at that spot.
So we believe that if someone was intent on driving off a cliff to kill themselves, they could have done it anywhere along that cliff face, as you would be killed on impact anyway, whether that was on the rocks, beach, rocky beach or water.
Mr. Templeman also says that the family believed that John Beckenridge cared too much for Mike to make an 11-year-old boy watch as his stepfather placed a stake to aim for as they went off the cliff, sent a series of farewell texts, and then plummet off the edge. He said the family believe they got on an ocean-going yacht or some transportation and left the country.
Mike's mother, Fiona Lou, now Russell, believes that when Mike is no longer under the influence of John Beckenridge, that he will reach out to her, and she further believes that John cared too much for Mike to hurt him.
However, Counsel for Police, Deirdre Elsmore, told the coroner that they believe it may be John Beckenridge's hatred for his ex-wife that drove him to kill himself and Mike.
John's attitude, his absolute white hatred and feelings of intense betrayal towards Fiona, and you might, sir, be left wondering that it is no coincidence that the two have died in circumstances that have left Fiona wondering whether they're dead or alive.
Deirdre Elsmore says the very doubt the circumstances of their disappearance causes may have been exactly John's intention and the ultimate punishment for what he saw as Fiona's betrayal. She says the police view is that John Beckenridge lacked the ability to successfully fake a murder-suicide, and the pair are dead.
John Beckenridge, at the time of his disappearance, lacked the funds, he lacked the support of associates, and the police would submit he also lacked the clarity of mind to plan an extremely difficult, complicated escape.
The police too say John Beckenridge cared for Mike Zhao Beckenridge, but their view is that that love for him, along with a belief that the boy was suicidal, led him to decide that the best option was for the two to die together.
Rachel Graham reporting there, 19 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know your thoughts on the government extending their fog cannon subsidy, putting another $11 million into that fund due to what they say is increased demand. They say it's a hugely popular scheme. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also interested in the weather in your district. There's been flash flooding in Waihi. That weather is heading further south. Let us know what it's like in your part of the motu as well. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko Ewe Ano tēnei.
Up to 50 residents in the western bay of plenty town of Waihi Beach have been evacuated to the RSA after a severe downpour caused flash flooding. Numerous roads are inundated with water. The police union fears there'll be more deaths on the roads as a new rule change gives officers increased powers to pursue fleeing drivers. The fleeing driver framework allows the police to decide whether they can justify launching a chase. The Police Association President Chris Cahill is concerned the spotlight will be taken away from offenders if there are more pursuit-related deaths. The Police Minister says there's been a significant increase in the number of businesses applying for the fog cannon subsidy, and the scheme will be expanded. Another $11 million is being put into the initiative. A private investigator believes John Beckenridge cared too much for his stepson to kill him. The coroner is considering whether the 64-year-old and 11-year-old Mike Zhao Beckenridge are missing or dead after disappearing from Southland in 2015. Investigator Mark Templeman has told the hearing that the pair could have left the country on a yacht. And Te Whatu Order has contingency plans in place to ensure health services continue when tens of thousands of nurses and health workers hold stop work meetings this week. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, the road is now closed between Te Poi and Tauriko on State Highway 9 at Lower Kaimai, while contractors are on scene there clearing a slip. State Highway 25 has reopened from 4 p.m. after closing for a time north of Waihi because of that inundation in Waihi Beach. And there's been a strong wind warning in place today on Desert Road, State Highway 1 between Waiouru and Rangipo. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 5:40.
Kia ora rā, e ho. A lot of you getting in touch about our interview with the Police Minister, Ginny Anderson. This is about the $11 million extension to the fog cannon subsidy. This person says the government pats itself on the back for providing more highly popular ambulances at the bottom of the Ramrade cliff. Emma says, how is a fog cannon a deterrent? What a massive spend. Harsher penalties, reckons Emma. Labor and the Minister is missing the point. And this from another listener. Yep, needs short and long-term solutions, not just lock them up. rhetoric. Do keep feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Former All Blacks coach Steve Hansen has come to the defence of controversial star Israel Folau, saying he can't be punished forever. Folau was sacked by Rugby Australia in 2019 for making anti-gay social media posts. He scored a try for Hansen's World 15 against the Barbarians on the weekend, but was jeered each time he touched the ball at Twickenham. Hansen says while he doesn't agree with Folau's views, he believes he should be given an opportunity to change. Well, we're joined now by our sports reporter Felicity Reid. Felicity, why was Steve Hansen so eager to include Israel Folau in his team?
Well, when Hansen made the selection or inclusion of Folau even in the wider squad, he knew that this wouldn't sit right with everybody. He's acknowledged it right the way through, that this perhaps isn't going to be something everybody is comfortable with. But he said he made the selection based on rugby talent. It was ability. It was that Folau has actually been playing rugby in Japan, and he's acknowledging that he was sanctioned 4 years ago for those anti-gay posts, and Hansen says he sort of lived out those sanctions, that the sanctions have passed now, and that he's saying that as part of, I guess, he's in this in-between time as well. Folau, he was a former Wallabies fullback. He switched allegiances, so he's likely to play for Tonga at the upcoming World Cup. And sort of based on that as well, Hansen was saying that his responsibility as the World 15 coach, it was important that he actually selected the best players available to him, and he saw that Folau fitted into that. And then he went on to say, you can't be punished for the rest of your life for having an opinion that most of us disagree with. It's always been a great believer that you can't help somebody change by leaving them on the outside. So I'm not sure how much of an impact a rugby coach will have on this situation, but Steve Hansen has really been sort of forced to front foot this a little bit as well. Even today he was wearing a pride flag wristband as he did media, and it was kind of that clear division of the team doesn't necessarily agree with Folau's point of view or stance, but they still want to include him as a rugby player. And even Hansen was saying today at Twickenham that it was in front of 32,000 people, and they also had a pride flag flying in the stadium there, which, as Hansen says, that wouldn't have actually been happening if Folau hadn't been selected in this team.
OK, let's talk about another athlete who was subjected to booing today, and this was Ukraine's Marta Kostyuk at the French Tennis Open. What was going on there?
Yeah, so it was the opening day at the French Open, and it's increasingly those charged matchups between players from the Ukraine and Russia, or in this case it was Belarus, as supporters of the invasion as they see it. And as well, this match didn't come very long after the largest drone attack by Russia on Ukraine since the start of the war. So Kostyuk was up against the tournament number 2 seed, Anya Selabenka, and Selabenka predictably won this. She's a lot higher ranked, but it was actually what happened after the match that got the Roland Garros crowd quite upset. So the two players came together at the end, but actually Kostyuk didn't acknowledge her opponent. She didn't shake hands, she didn't look her in the eye, she walked away. And so the crowd started to boo. They saw this as a great disrespect for Selabenka. They saw that perhaps they didn't, as both players have sort of said afterwards as well, that there might have been some misunderstanding around this as well. Kostyuk said that the crowd should be embarrassed for the way that they did the booing and the whistling as she was leaving the court. And Selabenka said perhaps they didn't really understand what was happening and saw the disrespect to her. But Selabenka herself understood what was happening. She realises in some ways this isn't really a slight on her as a player, because regardless of which player it is from Russia or Belarus, that Kostyuk would have acted in the same way. So it's that increasing tension as well, because tennis is one of those sports where players from these countries come up against each other a lot more often than, say, in other sports where that's not actually happening, or that Russia or Belarus are not allowed to participate.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. An extension of chunky fines and the threat of jail time might be what's needed to stop people bolting onto sports pitches, according to an events manager. Embarrassing, cringy and appalling is how some sports commentators and bosses have described the actions of the, quote, idiots who tried to run onto Napier's McLean Park during the NRL clash between the Warriors and Brisbane Broncos. 8 people have been trespassed from the stadium for 2 years for their game-interrupting antics on Saturday. Not to mention concern they could have jeopardised future venue choices. Rugby League great Paul Gallen told Channel 9's Sunday Footy show New Zealand might not be suitable for NRL fixtures.
The behaviour of the crowd last night was appalling, to be honest, and I think I've been a big advocate for having as much rugby league over in New Zealand as we possibly can going forward, and them being able to take games all around the country. But the way that they've crowd behaved last night, it's going to be impossible. The NRL can't let more games go there.
So that was Paul Gallen, and joining us now is Napier City Council Events Manager Kevin Murphy. So Kevin, what did you make of that behaviour?
Oh, we're gutted. I mean, it's certainly not the way that we wanted to see the end of the game, and we've put in so much work to get the team here. Starting back in 2015 was the first correspondence that we had with the Warriors. So I mean, for us to be able to put on the game and get through until those last 10 minutes, it was a fantastic night, and then it just turned to carnage.
And how would you describe those individuals' behaviour?
Well, it's just irresponsible. I mean, what are they thinking? Are they trying to prove to their mates that they can just get on the field? I mean, the problem, pitch invaders have been a problem for a long time, now and again. But we've certainly seen, from, I think Rotorua had a spate of them. Wellington had, in the first game of the season, had a problem. And now we've got this, and it's just gutting. I mean, from our point of view as a region, we've done so much to get it here. We had about 6,000 visitors in town. So, I mean, from our point of view, it's a great thing to be able to host, and to have a handful of people act the way they did is just, really upsetting.
What was in the water? Because there was 8 of them, right? That's a lot to make a dash for the pitch. Can you tell us anything about, were they locals? Were they visitors? Who were the bad behaviours?
I've spoken to the police yesterday, and they've indicated that they are locals. So, we don't know why they did it. We certainly haven't spoken to them. So they've been given a 2-year trespass. But, what's that really? At the end of the day, it's not really much of a deterrent. And we've got to find out who they are before we can actually enforce that anyway.
Yeah, so it's pretty tough. And is that all you could do under the current rules? Trespassing them was the best you could do?
Well, that's what the police have indicated. We know that the Major Events Act, that only really relates to the FIFA World Cup, for example, the women's coming up. When we've had the rugby and the cricket World Cups, the Major Events Act has got a $5,000 fine and a 3-month prison term maximum. Over in Australia, they've certainly got specified legislation in Melbourne and Sydney around pitch invaders, and their fines are definitely heavier than what we've got here. I mean, I think the maximum over in Melbourne's about 11,000.
So, Kevin, do you reckon we need to ramp it up then? Ramp it up?
Well, we've got to do something to deter the way that they're acting, because there needs to be something that's going to try and make them have second thoughts about going on the field and trying to disrupt.
So
it's just not good enough.
Realistically, would you like the legislation to be looked at, that major events legislation, to see if it can be expanded to cover things like your event?
Yep, that would be ideal if that can be done. That may be complicated. It may be easier to create something that's more specific around just general pitch invaders at sporting events and stadiums. But either way, there needs to be something that can be done to help us as venue operators and cities that are hosting events to be able to do it safely and to be able to keep the integrity of the NRL games in place. And that's what they want to see. It's what the security firms that are trying to enforce the field activity to stop them getting on there are trying to do. I mean, we had extra fencing in case anything like this happened, but you get multiple people coming at you, and security officers have only got 2 arms and 2 legs, haven't they?
Yeah, really appreciate your time, Kevin. That's Kevin Murphy, who's the Napier City Council Events Manager. Love your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Should it go up to $5,000 if you're a pitch invader? $5,000 or up to 3 months in jail is what it is for major events. Should they expand that to cover other games? 28 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona, second-hand cars, they are in hot demand. What's the latest?
Yeah, so we've heard from a company called New Zealand Automotive Investments. People probably know them better by one of their trading names, Too Cheap Cars. So they sell secondhand cars. Their financial results showed that their underlying profit was up as a result of a big gain in the sale of secondhand cars, a 6% increase. So this is in line with what we've seen from, say, Turner's Cars and so on. The market took a good look at this and thought, yeah, gross margins up. That's their profit margin. The outlook is positive. So today the share price rose 30%. Which is a pretty hefty increase in the share price. When you compare that, say, to new cars, recently we had some statistics for April, and it showed that the new residential vehicles, or like passenger vehicles rather than commercial vehicles, were down 17% on the year earlier, whereas most of the reason why there was an increase was commercial vehicles, so businesses buying vehicles. So secondhand cars are in hot demand. That's expected to continue for some time, and that partly reflects, the higher prices that people have to pay. So they're trimming their budgets and going secondhand instead of new.
And I'm imagining that cyclone damage would have something to do with it as well, because there were thousands of cars.
Well, sure, there would be thousands of cars, and people need to replace those, yeah.
Let's talk about tax bracket creep. Some people are saying middle-income families are paying too much tax because of that. Who reckons that?
Well, this is a guy named Mike Rudd. He is a tax expert with a business consultancy called Baker Tilly Staples Rodway, and he says that this has been a problem for some time. It's not a new one, and it hasn't been addressed, even though it keeps coming up as an issue. And one of the things he pointed out was, and I thought this was quite interesting, is that the living wage rate for a full-time worker is $54,080. Mm-hmm. But once you reach the threshold of $48,000, you are paying tax at 30%. So that's 30% of your income is being taxed. And if you think the top income...
On everything above that, 48.
Yes, on everything above. And for everyone else who say, the top end of that would be like 39%. So there's not a lot in it, really, at the top end of that band. So what he's saying is that has been eroding the benefits that are afforded to families through social housing, and all kinds of things are affecting this. So you've crept into a higher tax bracket, but you've received no additional benefits and your costs are up. So you're kind of no further ahead. He's saying that the tax system needs a complete overhaul. And one of the things he said was that it was a shame that the tax review that was undertaken by Sir Michael Cullen back in 2018, 2019, when the Labour government first came to power, was abandoned. He says the Labour government took fright and abandoned it. He said they should revisit that and look at what they can do, because it's time to bite the bullet. He says, yes, if we change these tax brackets, it's going to cost the tax system some money. But there are other taxes you can introduce. So it's not a matter of picking a little bit here and there. He's saying change the whole thing up so that it's fairer for everyone.
Okay, let's take a gallop around the markets, please.
Right, so we ended up 0.9%. That was a 106-point gain to 11,936, and that was on the share market. That's in line with what we're seeing in Asia, and certainly following some breakthrough, if you can call it that, on the debt ceiling lifting in the United States. Seems like there is at least a tentative agreement there to lift the tax threshold there. So, not the tax, but the money that they can use for debt, budget debt. That improved the market overall. But the Kiwi is still under pressure, and at 60.6 US cents, 92.6 Australian, and 49 British pence. And that's likely to continue for some time. There's not a lot of upside on the Kiwi. According to market strategists, they're thinking somewhere between 62, 63 is probably the best we can hope for this year.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier with Business News. The owner of a boutique beer company says his business is in strife after Inland Revenues ordered him to pay back COVID support funding. Avondale business Hopscotch couldn't open during the pandemic lockdowns. Owner Hugh Grierson got more than $46,000 in government COVID support payments, including the small business cash flow scheme. Following an audit, he's been forced to pay back some of the money with penalties because Inland Revenues says some was spent on stuff it shouldn't have been and incorrect earnings information was used in the application. But he is not alone. The department has asked 513 people who received COVID payments to pay back $16.4 million. Hopscotch owner Hugh Gresson joins us now. Kia ora, Hugh. How able are you to pay that money back?
Well, that's the problem. I'm negative monies really at the moment, so I can't.
And the penalties, how severe are they?
Well, I'm hopeful. What's happened is I've been trying to negotiate, and because I haven't organised a payback plan, there's penalties. But hopefully, once we organise the payback plan, or whatever happens, they might be able to take those penalties away. It's a few $1,000s at the moment.
So in simple terms, how have you fallen foul of the process? What is the issue here?
There's three issues. Firstly, I was shut down because MBIE didn't know there were independent stores in the Trusts region. And when it was pointed out to MBIE, they had a conversation. They decided that it wasn't very good optics and they didn't want to confuse people. So they just keep us shut and say safety in quote marks. And I didn't OIA, so I know the conversation that...
Right, so your business was forced to close, you're saying, yep?
I was forced to close and I had my opposition down the road with the doors wide open. So I was unlike any other bottle shop in any other part of the country. Not only was I shut, but my opposition were open with the doors wide open, and there was only 12 liquor shops open in the first lockdown, and all of West Auckland had to go to them, and there was huge queues, but MBIE weren't prepared to budge on that rule, so they just kept me shut.
Okay.
So I drove past my opposition open. So then I did two things wrong with the money. First thing I did wrong was you had to show your drop in turnover. You had to pick a representative week from a set period of time, pre-COVID and post-COVID. And what I did wrong was I just thought any week was representative because it was a week in the period. And that's what I think a lot of people have done. And I picked a good week and a bad week to show drop and trade. And obviously I was trying to make money on the side by doing deliveries to people's houses. And if it was clear what the rules were, and I want to make sure that people understand, a lot of people were very confused, including accountants, even accountants at big city law firms. A lot of people were a little bit confused about what was going on. And so I picked a good week and a bad week, had the drop and sale, and they said, no, you can't do that because it's got to be an average. But they didn't say average.
In the documentation, when you first made the application, they didn't specify an average. So you chose 2 weeks of your own picking, and they've now told you you've cherry-picked, basically, Hugh. That's what they're saying to you?
They didn't say average, they said representative.
Okay, so then you've got some other support funding, and they have indicated to you that it's gone on something that it shouldn't. Explain that to me, please.
Right, so then there was the resurgence payments, and to stop large corporations funneling money from the government to shareholders, they put a clause that you had to sign on the agreement saying, I'm not going to pay any dividends to shareholders. And the problem with that is all the businesses that are self-owned, usually, small family firms and one-man bands, they are owners of the company, so they're shareholders. So you couldn't give any money from the government money to the shareholder because it's dividends, even if it's wages or paying back money that you'd loaned to the company to keep it going during the tight time, your personal money. You couldn't do that. You could pay staff.
Right, so you're fallen foul of that, Hugh, because you paid yourself a wage. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
okay.
And I made sure that I didn't pay myself any more than I normally pay myself because I thought they might say that's dividends.
Did you know that at the time? Did you think you were complying with the rules when you paid yourself a wage?
Yeah, of course. I thought I was sweet. When they said we're going to audit you, I was pretty gutted because I knew it was going to be a major rigmarole, and it turned out to be a major rigmarole. And the reason why I was audited initially, it was because my company did really badly because I was in the really bad position of being shut while my opposition was wide open.
Do you feel you're being treated fairly, Hugh?
No, not at all.
Why?
Well, for example, if they made it, I feel like IID threw things together in a hurry and are now trying to go around and just put putty over the gaps and try and claw back any money they can. For example, if they said to me, oh, you can't pick a week, you have to have an average across this period of time, I wouldn't have been able to get the very first payment, and I would have gone, okay, I'm going to have to change how I run things, and I would have stopped doing deliveries. And I just would have spent time fixing up my house and had less income, but then I would have been fine.
So, Hugh, do you think the rules were not clear enough and now you are being held to account as a consequence of that?
That's exactly what's happened.
Do you know many other people who are in the same position as you are?
I know there's accountants who have been told off by IRD for giving bad advice. So accountants didn't know what the rules were. And I know that 29 out of 29 of my self-employed business customers who come into my shop, they ordered the same thing of me with the resurgence payments because they didn't have any money and they needed to live. And they basically, their main business expense was paying themselves wages.
Okay. So, Hugh, the thing here is obviously, as you will appreciate, taxpayer money, high bar. What do you think should happen then? If you feel that they're retrofitting the rules to catch some people out, should you have to pay it all back? Should you have to pay some of it out? We're almost out of time.
No, I don't think I should have to pay any of it back. I mean, what is the point of giving money to businesses to keep them afloat? And then once they've got through the COVID, then ripping the money away off them and letting them go down the gurgler. It's a waste of money. I mean, we've got through COVID, well-ish, and, what's going to happen? There's a lot of businesses who, especially because the resurgence payment is more of an Auckland problem because we had the last lockdown, there's a lot of businesses who were in dire straits going into the last lockdown who have done what I've done because hospital businesses never got back to full speed. I mean, even just the settings, it's saying 40%. You had to show a 40% drop in sales. Everybody was already down because people weren't going out and spending because they were staying at home.
Understand,
So they kind of, and then what happens is when IRD sets the rules too high and too strict, if people know the rules and it becomes apparent, there's an outcry and they backpedal, like they backpedaled on the resurgence. They took it down to 30%.
Appreciate your time, Hugh. We're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. That is Hugh Grierson, who's the hopscotch owner. I'm interested, is your business being audited? Have you run into the same problem? Do you think this money should be paid back? Let us know. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is almost 5:45. Homai o whakaro, do keep your feedback coming. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're a little late to the headlines, but Evie's very patient. Anea, Evie, mena pita kōrero.
Around 20 people are sheltering at the RSA in the Western Bay of Plenty town of Waihi Beach after a severe downpour caused flash flooding. Initially, 50 people were forced to leave their homes during the severe thunderstorms, which struck mid-afternoon. Around 15 homes will be uninhabitable tonight. The government is expanding its fog cannon subsidy scheme, announcing a further $1 million for the program today. $11 million for the program today. There's been high demand for the initiative with nearly 600 fog cannons installed since February. The Prime Minister doesn't believe removing senior politicians from the committee overseeing intelligence and security will improve scrutiny of the country's intelligence agencies. The idea is one of 52 recommendations from a review into intelligence and security laws. A private investigator believes John Beckenridge and his 11-year-old stepson could have fled the country in a yacht in 2015. Mark Templeman has told a coroner's hearing that the 64-year-old cared too much for Mike Zhao Beckenridge to kill him. The New Zealand Royal Honours, the Queen's Service Order and Queen's Service Medal are being renamed after King Charles III to acknowledge the new monarch. And politicians, environmentalists and representatives from the plastics industry are meeting in Paris tonight to agree on an international treaty against plastic pollution. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, contractors are currently on site clearing a slip on State Highway 9 at Lower Kaimai. Meanwhile, that road between Te Poi and Tauriko is still closed while that work continues. And at Lake Rotoma, due to a slip, State Highway 30 between Manawahe Road and State Highway 34 will be closed overnight, and that closure status will be reviewed in the morning. Our next news and weather are at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. Many Palmerston North hospital staff operate under a siege mentality where they fear speaking out with concerns, and they often face barriers when trying to move patients between departments. That's according to a damning report commissioned after the death of a heavily pregnant woman last year. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham has managed to get a copy of the report and he joins us now. Jimmy, tell us a bit more detail about how this came about.
Yeah, Lisa, this goes back a year or so to the death of a pregnant woman, a heavily pregnant woman in Palmerston North Hospital early last year. Now, she was admitted to hospital early in the morning, and despite it being clear to staff that she was majorly unwell, she wasn't admitted to the intensive care unit where it said that she needed to go until later that day, and she died that evening. So that's the background to which this review of culture and climate amongst the medical staff took place.
Okay, and what does it say?
Well, it's fairly damning. The man who did this, he's a chartered organisational psychologist called Jonathan Black, and he interviewed senior and junior doctors. And as we've said, a siege mentality has been described, but also concern about when patients have to move between departments, between different parts of the hospital. And that was what was at play with the death of that pregnant woman in early 2022. And the report finds that at worst, this is obstruction, so obstructive behaviour from some people in the hospital, some departments there.
As in not wanting to take over the patient, you mean?
Yes. So there's barriers in place between when there really shouldn't be. Patients should be able to go between different parts of the hospital, but for some reason that doesn't happen as easily as it should, and that has actually made some doctors, apparently, the phrase used by Mr. Black was moral injury. That's how they feel when their patients don't get the care that they think, not only that they think, that they actually deserve. There's also talk of, there's fears of speaking up, there's fears of disagreements and a belittling culture, undermining culture, and really a bullying culture there too.
Did they say what they fear if they speak up? What will happen? What's their fear?
Well, it's the way they're treated. There's a few staff there who perhaps have the backing of management or are in positions of power, and the way they will treat them, they'll just be ostracised or be belittled. They perhaps might be criticised for their views or having the temerity to speak up.
And so what recommendations have come out of this?
There's 7 recommendations, and some of them are to do with making it easier to speak up, the creation of what's called a professional communication committee, which will give people a vehicle to do that. But there's also some recommendations to do with that intensive care unit. We reported last year that it's about 6 or 7 years away for a new intensive care unit at Palmerston North Hospital. Palmerston North, like many hospitals around New Zealand, the resources there aren't great, the facilities aren't great, so that's a new building could be 6 or 7 years away. But Mr. Black has made some recommendations such as increased resourcing there and the creation of a high dependency unit, which is it's a unit under that. Intensive care is your most sick patients, your most injured, the ones who are critically unwell. A high dependency unit is just that level under that. We don't have that at Palmerston North at the moment. It's just the intensive care unit, although there are some changes being made there.
Okay. And what has people's reaction been to this report?
We asked Te Whatu Ora some detailed questions about some of the comments raised in this. We did not get a detailed response from Te Whatu Ora. A statement from them said that they're trying to foster a better workplace culture and that they welcome the report and will be acting upon it. National's health spokesman Dr. Shane Reti said he was particularly concerned about the belittling, and it's, as he said, it's not healthy, is it, when you have what appears to be quite a level of animosity between management and the clinical staff there too. We also heard from Dr. Deborah Powell, the General Secretary for the union that represents junior doctors, and she said, well, this mirrors findings that they had in 2018 and 2019 when they did their own surveys, finding a culture of bullying, and that management seems to not do a lot about that.
Thank you for that, Jimmy. That's our reporter, Jimmy Allingham. Police have redesigned their policy when it comes to pursuing fleeing vehicles. Most drivers who have failed to stop for police in the last 2 years haven't been caught. But parents who've had children killed in these high-speed chases say the cost of an arrest is just too high. Soumya Barmiripati reports.
70 people have died in that 10-year period since I lost my girl. Well, that's not just 70 people have died. There's been 70 families have died with that. Not just my girl died. I died on that day.
Tony Jarvis's daughter, Carleen, was killed in 2010. She was 20. She was a passenger in a car that fled from police. 2 years after tightening the rules around pursuits, the police are now moving to relax them again. Tony Jarvis says it's madness, particularly given the death of a fleeing driver in Dunedin just 2 days ago.
The police know all these decades of police pursuits, the amount of innocent people that have died, and yet in the face of a tragedy in the weekend, they're upping their police pursuits and hoping for a different outcome. That's insanity.
Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says the new rules balance safety and holding offenders to account. He says they factor in the further harm an offender could cause if they aren't caught.
Whether we're pursuing or not, there is a risk to the public. And so we're trying to do our job in the best way that we can, meeting public expectation around apprehending offenders for serious crimes, whilst recognising that we don't want to increase the risk to the public.
Sonny Korshall from the Dairy and Business Owners Group agrees the police have to chase offenders who flee.
If the offenders are doing some, crime, if they're running, and then the police has to chase, they have to apprehend them before those offenders end up doing something else. They are a risk to the whole community.
Police Association President Chris Cahill says there's been a 106% increase in the number of people fleeing since the number of pursuits was reduced. He says it's likely the new rules will result in more deaths, but says there's no perfect fleeing driver policy.
The public have been out there demanding police pursue more of these people. Well, they've got to understand the consequences of that. There could be people injured or killed. And so if that occurs, there needs to be a lessons learned approach taken rather than a punishment to police officers who are trying to get that balance right.
But to Dion Stone, that trade-off is unacceptable. His daughter Georgina was also a passenger in a vehicle that fled from police in 2010. She was 20 years old when she died in the crash. Dion Stone says he wants to see different methods used to catch offenders.
How much do we want their property back, and how willing are we to see that person being locked up for what they've done to kill someone else? Either somehow the police pull back, knowing who the culprits are and knowing where they're going to be, or need better tactics.
The police say they'll be reviewing the outcomes of any pursuits regularly and fine-tuning the new rules as needed.
Tourism businesses in cyclone-hit regions say the welcome mat is out, but not enough people have come in. For many in the tourism industry, winter usually signals a time to hunker down and survive off their summer earnings. But Cyclone Gabrielle cut summer short, causing widespread disruption and damage after an already difficult few years. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Tourism is one of the biggest contributors to the economy in the Hawke's Bay. Hawke's Bay Tourism Chief Executive Hamish Saxton says it's a challenge to banish perceptions that the region is difficult to get to. He says from a tourism standpoint, it's very much back in business.
Tourism employs roughly 10% of our population in Hawke's Bay. It's worth over 620 million. It's really, really important.
Hamish Saxton says a drop in visitor numbers will hit businesses across the region. He says they can deliver great experiences, but the demand is sadly lacking. They're trying to encourage more to visit through domestic social media campaigns.
Our visitor economy is very, very reliant upon the understanding that, for the very, very most part, our industry, our sector, are warmly welcoming and highly desirous of visitors to be back and enjoying Hawke's Bay.
He says international tourists have been strong, but the majority of their visitor market, about 80%, relies on domestic travellers. While winter is traditionally a shoulder season, he says they have plenty of events to entice more travellers over the slower months. Further north in Tairāwhiti, Māori-owned Maunga Hikorangi Experience is temporarily closed due to cyclone damage to its track and roads in the region, with hopes to reopen by July. Program Manager Brett Johnston says he's looking forward to returning to some sense of normality.
Just take the time over winter to pause, reset, and then come spring and summer we can re-engage again and go back to market and say that we're open, we're ready for business, no mai haramai.
Dean Savage from Dive Tatapauri says they didn't experience any structural damage, but when access to Gisborne was cut off, so was the flow of visitors.
So we had no flow of visitors. We had support from our local community, but without a doubt the numbers crashed, and It was particularly hard on a lot of the operators having just come through COVID. So we're looking forward to a year on the back of that, a year we're finally open, and then the cyclone hits.
While highway access has been restored, there is still plenty of roadwork underway and traffic conditions in place.
We've dealt with a few bumps in the road before. For the new operators, quite a bit tougher. The roads are going to be open in spring, so we want to let New Zealand know we're open for business in spring, and I think that'll bring a new energy back into the region.
Tourism New Zealand Chief Executive Renee De Monchi says part of their role is ensuring travel sellers and visitors are well informed about visiting the regions.
Our key focus now really is making sure there's accurate information, knowing, who's open, where can I stay, what can we do, and importantly, how do I get there?
A $1 billion flood and cyclone recovery package was announced as part of the budget, with funding to rebuild the roading network. Earlier in the year, $75 million was approved to assist businesses with immediate costs and clean-up.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on our interview regarding COVID payments, support payments from the government. IRD is auditing some people, and we talked to a business owner who's been asked to pay some of the money back because he says he misunderstood the rules. Paul says ignorance of the rules is no excuse. He has claimed support he is not entitled to. Taxpayers' money, pay it back. On the other hand, this listener says leave the guy alone, let him carry on with the business and focus on real issues. Amanda says I completely hear what Hugh says. I had exactly the same issue. I am a sole person working as a contractor. I also was forced to pay it back. Exactly the same thing. I was horrified, says Amanda. IRD hitting the easy targets, not the big corporations who raked in millions during COVID, always the way. It will cost them more than $46,000 to audit this poor guy. Another person says the conditions for the payments were confusing. However, once the business realised it was wrong, they could have paid it back as ours did. It was very plain that shareholders could not be included. On the subject of fog cannons and the government chucking in $11 million more into subsidising them, Drew says, has the policeman never heard the phrase ambulance at the bottom of the cliff? Maureen says fog cannons to stop kids ram raiding, not the answer. Get kids out of poverty. The government needs to pour money into low-income families now. They can do it, says Maureen. Surely the government is damned if they do and damned if they don't, says Al. Fog cannons could be described as a cost of business. Good on the government for subsidising it. And another listener, Chris, says it's unfair and unreasonable to imply the program dealing with youth offending is a failure when all research shows there are no shortcuts here. And a segue on fog cannons, Frank's got in touch and says, pitch invaders. I recommend the usual, fog cannons. Another says streakers or pitch invaders almost always get a standing ovation, usually the reaction of a crowd highly entertained.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Talofa lava, I'm Evie Ashton. The manager of the Waihi Beach RSA says at least 15 homes in Western Bay of Plenty are uninhabitable tonight due to flash flooding. Met Service says 44 millimetres of rain fell in just an hour after 2 p.m. today. Now dozens of people have been evacuated from their homes. Mel Geron has told Checkpoint the Waihi community has rallied together to support those affected.
We've got some people going to private homes, some people going through to accommodation like campgrounds and things are in the area as well. So it's there's certain spots that have been affected quite heavily. There are some places that are still okay.
Mel Geron says the rain is subsiding now, but around 20 people are being fed and have been given beds at the RSA. Parents who've had children killed in police pursuits say the cost of an arrest is just too high. It comes as the police announce they're taking a more aggressive approach to pursuing fleeing drivers in the hopes of catching more offenders. Tony Jarvis's daughter, Carleen, was killed in 2010 when she was a passenger in a car that fled from police. He says the rule change is disgusting, particularly given the death of a fleeing driver in Dunedin just 2 days ago.
The police know all these decades of police pursuits, the amount of innocent people that have died, and yet in the face of a tragedy in the weekend, they're upping their police pursuits and hoping for a different outcome. That's insanity.
Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says the new rules balance safety and holding offenders to account. The Prime Minister says the retail crime spike recently seen in New Zealand is utterly unacceptable. The government is expanding its fog cannon subsidy scheme in light of soaring demand, announcing a further $11 million for the program today. Chris Hipkins says this should subsidise an extra 3,000 devices for businesses.
The retail crime spike that we have been experiencing is utterly unacceptable. Those business owners and their employees experiencing the spike firsthand should not have to be fearful when they go to work.
Since applications opened in February, nearly 600 fog cannons have been installed and more than 1,600 applications have been approved. The Resident Doctors Association isn't surprised a new report into the culture and climate at Palmerston North Hospital has raised concerns. National Secretary Deborah Powell says the report, which identifies concerns from doctors about operating in a siege mentality and being afraid to speak up, mirrors findings from several years earlier. Dr Powell says the union did surveys in 2018 and 2019. The latest report was commissioned after a pregnant woman died of sepsis last year when her admission to intensive care was delayed. A private investigator hired by the family of an 11-year-old who has been missing since 2015 says they believe the boy's stepfather cared for him too much to kill him. The coroner is holding a hearing to determine if John Beckenridge and his stepson, Mike Zhao Beckenridge, are missing or dead. Today, the coroner heard from private investigator Mark Templeman, who said the family believes the pair had help and left New Zealand on an ocean-going yacht or boat. Mr Templeman says John Beckenridge had previously changed his name and started a new life overseas. He says Mike's mother believes that her son will eventually reach out to her. Recreational surfers are being offered life-saving skills after new research found they're saving more than 1,000 people from the water each year. Auckland University of Technology surveyed more than 400 surfers from across the country, finding surfers carried out 1,274 rescues, of which 48 were life-saving. The rescues included swimmers and boating and water sport accidents. Surfing New Zealand Chief Executive Ben Kinning says they're rolling out a course called Surfers Rescue 24/7.
Your safety is paramount, so making sure that you have your surfboard in between you and the rescuee, and then understanding the best ways to get them to shore, so that's the techniques that are shown in these courses.
Ben Kinning, a veteran surfer, says he's rescued swimmers, including children, from rips on his home break in Whangamata. An investigation into the communications former Cabinet Minister Stuart Nash had with his donors has been delayed. Mr Nash was sacked from Cabinet in March over an email he'd sent to a donor in 2020 which breached Cabinet confidentiality. The inquiry, which would look into whether there'd been actual or perceived conflicts of interest, was announced 2 months ago and expected to take 2 months. But the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the Cabinet Secretary, who is conducting the inquiry, has asked for 2 more weeks to finalise the report and contact those whose communications have been reviewed. Mr Hipkins says he has deliberately kept out of the investigation. And the latest efforts to agree an international treaty against plastic pollution kick off tonight in Paris. Ministers from around the world, representatives from the plastics industry and environmental campaigners are taking part in a new round of talks to try to thrash out an agreement. It's the second such gathering following a UN resolution to have a treaty ready for signing by the end of next year. The BBC's Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
No one disputes the scourge of plastic pollution. Currently, of the 300 million tonnes being produced every year, the vast majority ends in landfill or the natural environment, especially the sea. But there are different approaches, for example, on whether the focus should be more on recycling or on cuts in production and usage of plastics, and on what type of sanction should be available against countries that flout targets.
That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, the FIFA Women's World Cup is less than 2 months away. Are our local football clubs ready to play host? Ashley Bloomfield throws his weight behind a mindfulness program for school children nationwide. In the US, a debt ceiling deal's been done. Can it be sold to lawmakers in time to avoid a default? And filmmaker Luke Cornish on his film that offers a glimpse into the lives of street dancers and the challenges they face. With me on 9 to Noon on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula. Occasional showers, some heavy and possibly thundery today. And again in Taranaki late tomorrow. Early morning fog patches. Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain heavy at times with possible thunderstorms, easing to showers today. Further showers tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain or showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Wairarapa. Periods of rain or showers, but long fine spells in Wairarapa tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Rain or showers with heavy and possibly thundery falls clearing from Marlborough and Nelson for a time tonight and tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Scattered rain, mainly in the west and south, clearing today but returning for a time tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy today, rain and possible thunderstorms tomorrow. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. There are mixed feelings about national backtracking on a bipartisan housing policy that it helped draft. It's been labelled a massive flip-flop by the government, but National says it was always open to tweaking the policy to make it work better. The agreement signed in 2021 means buildings of up to 3 storeys can be built in most cities without the need for resource consent. While some say National's move will help preserve culture and heritage, others are concerned about what it could mean for the future of our cities. Delphine Herbert has the story.
Auckland's Character Coalition represents heritage groups and residents' associations, thus celebrating National's decision to back away from the bipartisan policy. Its chair, Sally Hughes, says the blanket policy would have seen some of the super city's most precious buildings destroyed.
It would have meant the loss of quite a lot of character heritage in our special character areas. So we were never in favour of that legislation. So we're pleased to see that the bipartisan accord has unravelled.
Sally Hughes doubts the policy would have worked how it intended to.
We know that developing housing in those areas will never result in affordable housing because the land is too valuable in those areas. So we were very concerned that because it was a sweeping measure across the whole of Tamaki Makaurau, that character and heritage areas would be destroyed in the process.
But Auckland University architecture and planning lecturer Timothy Welch believes the framework is fit for purpose.
We have the infrastructure pretty well developed already in the city to handle higher levels of density. We start to see trouble when we start to expand out and build in areas that don't have any infrastructure at all.
He says it is better to build up rather than out.
Rain doesn't care about how high a city is, but it does care about how wide it is. So if we take away all the green fields, if we take away wetlands, and floodplains, then we really put ourselves in a much more vulnerable position than if we just get denser inside the city.
Meanwhile, AUT Construction Management Professor John Tukey is calling on policymakers not to get ahead of themselves when planning for more housing.
The water reticulation infrastructure, the roading setup and everything else is inappropriate, inefficient and incapable of being able to cope with the additional load. And we should be working on delivering that infrastructure in the first instance before we get all excited about more and more houses.
Deputy Prime Minister Carmel Sepuloni is questioning National's about-face on the policy.
It's really a slap in the face to Nicola Willis and Judith Collins, who at the time signed the agreement. They were really clear at that time that we needed to come together to address the urgency of housing and that this was the plan to do that.
National's Housing and Infrastructure spokesperson Chris Bishop says the party listened to council's concerns about wanting more discretion and flexibility, which is why it made the decision. He says the party will still be firm on ensuring there is enough land for development.
We're going to make councils put 30 years of demand growth into the market
straight away, essentially in the short term, which will create abundant development opportunities and drive down the price of land, which is artificially inflated by these planning restrictions that have held our cities back for too long.
The government says it does not want to back down from medium-density residential standards and says it will revisit its plan.
Residents in a rural North Auckland street are concerned about the state of their roads, where a woman had a serious accident on a quad bike. She and 2 children were taken to hospital. They took their concerns to council, asking for a fix after heavy rain washed parts of the road down a bank. Locals have been using quad bikes to access their homes in the meantime. Emma Stanford has the story.
It's a very narrow one-way road that's been disappearing since the first COVID lockdown, as heavy rain causes more of it to wash down a bank. Now, some parts of Ashton Road in the Rodney district are only passable by quad bike. A woman is in a serious condition after sliding 50 metres down a bank on the weekend. She had 3 children on with her and had to be winched out by the Westpac rescue helicopter. She is in a stable condition in Auckland City Hospital. 2 children have since been discharged from Starship Hospital and a third has minor injuries. This Ashton Road resident says he raised the state of the road with the council 10 months ago.
I got hold of council and I said, we need to see an engineer up here and also signage on the road warning people. Well, I never heard another word back from them.
He says the problem started when logging trucks started going up and down the road.
There was basically 4 loads a day going out, and this carried on for quite some time. So the road really got a hammering right out to the main road. I suspect there's going to be more subsidence on both sides of the road, actually. A lot of trees have come down in the bush.
Fellow resident Hugh McCurgo says the road has been getting narrower.
And this last year, it's virtually fallen in. It's almost impassable in parts. The work that should have been done ages ago just hasn't been done. I hope this will trigger something to happen pretty quickly.
Mr McCurgo says some grading work was done at the bottom of the road, but the top has been inaccessible. Auckland Transport says it has a team on site making assessments.
Wheelchair boxer John Field is set to finally return to the ring after a long and tumultuous journey. John will fight in a boxing event for people living with a range of disabilities, and he is hoping it can be a catalyst to grow adaptive sport throughout Aotearoa. Sports reporter Jonty Dine and camera operator Marika Habazi have his story.
He may be an undefeated heavyweight boxer, but John Boulder Shoulders Field says he can be made to feel completely powerless when out on the streets. John has battled severe physical and mental health issues throughout his life, which may already be over if not for boxing. It's been an incredibly difficult road to the ring for John. Born with cerebral palsy and Down syndrome, he developed mental health issues at a very early age.
I have spasms on the right side, which means my whole right side can shake, and then it can change over to the next leg, which I have no control over, so it was from birth.
As a result, John was depressed and eating himself into an early grave.
Probably be at home eating until I go to heaven, doing nothing.
After losing his mother in 2016, John would face the biggest fight of his life.
Didn't know how to deal with it, Dark places, every single day.
A fight for survival.
One that I recall was induced coma. I took more than the legal dose. I had prescription meds that just take the normal doses. I took like 6 to 8 boxes of paracetamol, tramadol, whatever I could get my hands on at the time, and thought that was the end of me, and had counselling.
Fiu had always been a big fan of David Tua and discovered adaptive boxing through the former heavyweight champion. The South Auckland knockout artist has been riddled with self-doubt throughout his career.
I used to attack myself and stab myself and cut myself on the arms and say that I'm worth nothing.
Fortunately, John was able to pull himself out of the darkness.
If you don't aim for a dream, then you'll probably go back into the dark place.
He found his saviour in the form of AJ Power and Rise Fitness.
16 my friend. You see?
Yep. Thank you. AJ Power is the one that saved my life, man. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be sitting here with my 5 wheels, doing what I love.
Do you roll like you mean it?
I do. I am.
John says his trainer, coach and close friend has the angel touch.
She's there like every day, man, like telling me, don't give up. Even though the world looks down at you like it's like a ton of bricks. First time I met her, I told her that I tried taking my life. She asked me why, because I told her that the place that I was in didn't want to be here.
He says there is no doubt AJ saved his life.
Listening to his experiences on top of my experiences and just sharing those things between us, I mean, there's not much difference between his life and mine. We still face the same kind of discriminations and a lot of no's before yeses, and especially with this event coming up, you know, we heard a lot of no's for a long time because no one could envision what we had in mind.
AJ is also living in a wheelchair after falling from a 3rd-storey balcony in 2016, dislocating her spine, cracking her head, breaking her ribs and puncturing a lung. An athlete who trained 7 days a week prior to her accident, personal training was a natural fit and she would soon begin working with John. The pair have developed a strong bond.
He said, I want to be the first boxer in New Zealand, represent the country and all that stuff, and it's taken us this long to actually get it somewhere.
How I control the chair is with my arms, and if I want to stop, I just pull back.
John is undefeated as a boxer, having racked up an 18-0 record, but it has been a constant battle to find opponents.
Had a few ups and downs, and people saying that, yeah, you're gonna fight, and then they drop out, and then, oh, sorry, we can't help you with your journey. And next gym comes along, it's the same issue. And
he's become better known for his nickname, Boulder Shoulders, than John.
Boy, those are boulders, all right.
John will fight in an upcoming event for people living with disabilities.
And this is across all different disabilities. We've got the visually impaired, we've got amputees, cerebral palsy, all sorts, spina bifida. I mean, I don't think boxing discriminates, and neither does fitness. It's just the people.
John says he's aiming for Worlds in 2024.
There's no sport like adaptive boxing in New Zealand at all. All over the world does, but New Zealand doesn't. So it's time for able-bodied people to come and see and come and support us as a disabled community.
Despite all the setbacks, John says he will keep fighting.
If you have a goal, aim for it. Even though I've had my ups and downs, I just gotta keep fighting and keep wheeling every day.
Come on. Back you go.
And if you were listening to John Fiu's story on radio, don't forget to check out the video version. It'll be on our webpage. Pretty remarkable man. And that was filmed by Marika Habazi. It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The prospect of the world's biggest economy running out of money is still looming over lawmakers in the US. Republican and Democratic leaders are trying to convince their own parties to support a debt ceiling agreement aimed at preventing a crisis. The ABC's Jade McMillan reports.
After a late-night announcement of a debt ceiling breakthrough, the Republican House Speaker says he worked through until morning to finalise the details. But Kevin McCarthy's job isn't over yet. He still needs to sell the plan to members on his own side.
We know at any time when you sit and negotiate within two parties that you got to work with both sides of the aisle.
So it's not 100% of what everybody wants, but when you look, the country is going to be stronger. This is going to be transformational.
The in-principle agreement locks in the nation's ability to borrow for another 2 years, pushing out the next fight over the debt limit until after the 2024 presidential election. It also caps and in some cases cuts government spending over the same period. President Joe Biden has described the deal as a compromise, arguing it will prevent what could have been a catastrophic default, leading to a recession and the loss of millions of jobs. But an element of the plan to expand work requirements for people receiving benefits to help them buy food has prompted concern from some Democrats. The chair of the Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, spoke to CNN.
It is bad policy. I told the president that directly when he called me last week on Wednesday, that this is saying to poor people and people who are in need that we don't trust them.
The debt ceiling agreement needs to be passed by a divided Congress before June 5th, the date by which Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned the US could run out of money to pay its bills. And some of the Republican Party's most conservative members who'd pushed for deeper spending cuts are suggesting they won't back it. South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman has described the deal as insanity, while Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert says she'll be voting no. Kevin McCarthy insists he has the support of the vast majority of House Republicans, but the country now faces a nervous wait ahead of a vote expected later this week.
Huge crowds in the Turkish capital Ankara have been celebrating President Erdogan's election victory. The man who's already headed Turkey for 20 years is now going to rule it for at least another 5 after beating off a strong challenge from a united opposition in an acrimonious runoff election. This despite an acute economic crisis and lingering anger over his handling of 2 devastating earthquakes in February. Here's the BBC's Orla Guerin in Ankara.
The Recep Tayyip Erdogan juggernaut rolls on. And tonight in the Turkish capital, the streets belong to his supporters, who have stuck with him through thick and thin and hyperinflation.
We are blessed that our president is leading us again. There is no better feeling than this. Let the world hear it. He is the leader who has taught the entire world a lesson.
And here he was, serenading supporters, or trying to, from a bus top near his home in Istanbul, having beaten off the biggest challenge in years. The only winner, he said, is Turkey, before stoking divisions with an attack on the opposition and the LGBTQ community. Earlier, he handed out cash outside a polling station like a modern-day sultan, one who has now extended his reign for another 5 years. His rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, ran as Mr. Nice Guy, but then veered right, vowing to send all refugees home. Supporters chanting his slogan today, "Everything will be beautiful." He's our hope, she told us. Now defeated, he says he fears much bigger troubles are ahead for Turkey. The choice here was stark. 2 very different options, a seasoned autocrat or an untested democrat. Most voters went with the devil they know. The process is carried out very carefully here. You have to arrive with a voting slip and with your ID. Your name is checked on the list, and after you vote, you sign that you have done so. There are observers here too from all the political parties, but President Erdogan has gone into this contest with key advantages, not least almost total control of the media. Uzcan Akar, a retired lawyer of 90, came out to vote for change.
Halen diktatöryal bir rejim var.
In Turkey, currently, there's a dictatorial regime. I am voting to return to democracy. First of all, there is no justice. The president holds executive and legislative powers. This is the biggest mistake.
But tonight, packed victory celebrations outside the presidential palace of 1,000 rooms. Recep Tayyip Erdogan is newly emboldened. The opposition is badly bruised, and this strategic nation has chosen its path.
On this day 70 years ago, New Zealand beekeeper and mountaineer Edmund Hillary with Nepalese Sherpa Tenzing Norgay were the first people to reach the summit of the world's highest peak, Mount Everest. Since then, Nepal has become a mecca for climbers, but it's estimated up to 15 people go missing there each year while hiking alone. Now, a new rule has come into force. All trekkers must be accompanied by a licensed guide. The BBC's Madeline Drury went 4 k's above sea level to find out more.
That bellowing laugh belongs to longtime guide Pasang Sherpa.
I feel so happy, because it's not about the money, it's just about the more safety. At least we want the people safely back to their home.
In the 15 years he has shared Nepal's landscape with trekkers, Pasang has assisted multiple helicopter rescues for people suffering with altitude sickness alone. He believes without a guide, the outcome may not have been as good.
Within one and a half months, it changed a lot.
Just over 12 kilometres away in Chomrong, Nitra Sunna is stamping permits. He is in charge of checking that hikers have the right paperwork. It's the last official stop before making the popular climb up to Annapurna Base Camp.
I can see that the number of solo trekkers has gone down, but solo travellers keep coming. I have not been given any authority to implement this rule. I tell them we have nothing in writing, nothing in black and white. If we are authorised, then we are ready for it.
The tourism board says any checkpoints who have not received the authorisation will receive it very soon, as they're reviewing the checkpoints for effective implementation. As for Nepal's crown jewels, the Everest region, a row has been brewing.
In our region, in Everest region, my message for solo trekkers is welcome in our region.
That's Minga Chiri Sherpa.
I'm the mayor of this Khumbu Pasang Lama rural municipality.
For the 40,000 trekkers who have already crossed into his region this year, Minga says they have not been enforcing the rule on those going solo.
They never did any kind of consultation with us. They never asked with the stakeholders. They are making this kind of rule for the benefit of the agency.
Nepal's tourism board says all regions have known about the rule change for some time and say they are working together to resolve the issue. There it is, Annapurna Base Camp. Back in the Annapurna region, Pasang guides the group to base camp in one piece.
Back home, the last word goes to Mike and Ahuriri. Bring back the stocks for pitch invaders. You get thrown into them along the path out of the stadium so departing fans can tell you exactly what they think of your idiocy. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi tomorrow on First Up, 5 a.m. They get a whiff of a new K Road fragrance being sold for charity. Does it smell like armpits or tequila? Ooh, wish I was involved in that sniff test. We hear from the campaign's heroes to find out. Have a fab evening. Let's talk again on Tuesday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Talofa lava, I'm Evie Ashton. Several residents of Waihi Beach in the Western Bay of Plenty will spend the night away from home tonight after flooding forced evacuations this afternoon. Another $11 million is being put into the fog cannon subsidy scheme for small businesses due to demand. And the coroner's hearing into the 2015 disappearance of John Beckenridge and his stepson has been told the 64-year-old may have wanted his ex-wife to always wonder whether the pair were dead or alive. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pacific Waves.
Bringing Kiribati back into the forum.
Diving into the big stories of the region.
They are an instrument of the Constitution of Fiji.
And shining a light on issues affecting Pacific peoples in Aotearoa and around the world.
being able to go out into different places and areas that share special connections with our community was really special.
We tala noa to Pacific leaders, newsmakers, experts and commentators, and bring you up-to-date coverage from our dedicated RNZ Pacific team and talented correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves at 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
Hello again, you're still with me, Evie Ashton, through till 7 o'clock. Right now it's time for the detail. And wallabies are hopping closer to one of our most precious national parks. Do we have the tools to stop them in their tracks?